Good afternoon, and welcome to the award-winning third season of Raising the NSBAR. I'm Jeff Lasky, the CEO of this great organization, the North Shore-Barrington Association of Realtors. I hope you are continuing to stay safe and healthy. Before I get started, I need you to jump into your calendar and block out next Thursday, March 25th, from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. That's when the NSBAR Member Recognition Digital event is being televised. Check out NSBAR's e-newsletter, What's Now and What's Next, and our social networking posts for how you can tune in to watch this online. It's one of our can't-miss events. My goodness, we're having one star after another on Raising the NSBAR. This week we have another amazing gift, my friend Rebecca Jensen. Rebecca is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Midwest Real Estate Data, also known as MRED, for those out there who might not know that. MRED's one of the largest MLSs in the country, and of course the MLS for much of Illinois, including the members of NSBAR. I think everybody knows you, Rebecca, so I'm going to skip your huge list of accomplishments. Is there something, unless there's something you want to talk about, or yeah, I think everybody.
No, just happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Definitely. You know what? No warm-up questions. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. So I'm going to just jump in, and as usual, your great expertise is going to help us through some of this stuff. And we put information out about this, but I just want to get clear on a couple of things. And first is going to be this proposed showing time acquisition by Zillow. Let's jump right into that one. But I don't want to, here's how I want to do this. I want to frame it in terms of process, which I learned so much about process from you over the years. In other words, it's not whether you like it, don't like it, blah, 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 but to instead inform our audience of the process that MRED goes through when it's confronted with an issue like this. So how do you approach this? What goes into the analysis?
Oh, great question. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk to your members. And, MRED has definitely some fundamentals that we try to adhere to. And one of them is that we are a broker-owned MLS and an association-owned MLS, both, right? And so we very much take into consideration the viewpoint of our stakeholders, and we try to involve as much as humanly possible the sentiments and the actions and the proposed actions of all of our stakeholders. So whether that's an association or our brokerages. And we had a lot of people thankfully reach out to us after they had heard about the acquisition and say, not only what is MRED doing, but here's what we're thinking about doing. And so MRED as an MLS is responsible for creating an organized marketplace, not just of data, but also regarding technology. And so obviously Showing Time was, is currently a vendor that enjoys, I think it's like 99% adoption rate. Like everybody uses Showing Time when they are at that point in a transaction. And we currently have other vendors that have reached out to us, and some of them through brokerages that say, hey, we've been talking to such and such brokerage. We have a product that some of them are thinking about adopting. So, some of them are vaporware, meaning it's an idea at a company that has yet to be developed into a usable product. So we know that there are certain vendors on the radar to pay attention to. For example, one that reached out to us quickly after the announcement went public was HomeSnap, who's the current vendor of MRED, saying that they had showing on their roadmap, and now they're going to put that up to the top. So we're talking to them. We had some brokerages saying, hey, some key box systems like Central Lock also have some sort of a showing service. Other brokerages said that there are vendors that are actively being used for showing services in other states that, maybe they're a franchise organization and, so it wasn't adopted widespread across the entire franchise, but in some offices. And so we are actively trying to collect all of the different showing options out there. And we're also talking about, MRED is a data collection tool. And we don't currently collect the showing data because Showing Time does that right now. But what would it look like if MRED did collect some showing data? Now, one thing that we don't want to collect, because quite frankly, we don't want the responsibility, is the personally identifiable information of consumers. So a homeowner has right now, you know, a method to maybe respond to a text saying, yeah, I'm willing to show my property at 2 p.m. on Saturday. I don't want to know the homeowner's phone number. I don't want to be involved in any of that. There's a lot of liability that way. But I am interested in knowing that 123 Main Street had a showing at 2 p.m. on Saturday. So we're talking to brokerages right now and associations to say, hey, how can MRED help keep a rational marketplace with respect to showings? How can we incorporate different showing platforms? Because I really think that the industry is going to start, this isn't like conjecture, right? Like, because I just said that there are different vendors that are coming into this space. So I think that the likelihood of some additional vendors being adopted into our marketplace is high. So we just, again, want to make sure that we have everything as seamless as possible, while at the same time allowing our brokerages to have a choice for the showing platform that they feel comfortable with. So we currently have no plans to jettison Showing Time. Like, we're on a month-to-month contract. It just so happened that was the timing of our contract renewal with Showing Time, which was fortuitous. And so we're going to beef up the data sections of the contract to make sure that those that continue to use Showing Time know what is happening with their data, what can be maintained, what can be shared, how it can be used. So that's something that is part of our process. And then we will look at different vendors that emerge and talk to our brokers and associations, and always keep in mind that we want to have seamless data, no matter where it comes from, which vendor it comes from. We want to make sure that all of MRED's subscribers have equal access to that data.
Now, but to be clear, what triggered an analysis of like the Showing Time situation is that it was bought by somebody else. It's not that it was bought by Zillow or any specific, it was just that it was bought by somebody. And so on that basis, that triggers you guys saying, you know what, at least we need to take a look at this and make sure everybody's comfortable.
Well, and like I said, our contract was up for renewal, so we do that as a matter of course anyway. So every time a contract comes up, we look at all of it, and we have kind of standard terms that we like to put into each of our contracts. And over time, those standard terms change just upon, you know, different developments that happen. So we always try to keep those as up to date, and every contract to have similar provisions as much as practical.
Yeah. Well, and again, a benefit of MRED, right? Being as large as MRED is, you get to tell vendors the provisions they're going to have in the contracts, not the other way around, right?
Well, we work with them, you know, it depends, but we always look for the win-win. You know, we want to be known as an MLS that vendors want to go to first. I think that benefits our subscribers, you know, and we try to champion our vendors, because part of our role is definitely to curate technology, you know, because there's no lack of people that want to get into the agent pocket. You know, I'm sure agents have a lot of phone calls from some new vendor firm that just for $9.99 per month can give you like XYZ, right? And so that's part of also what MRED does, is try to do our due diligence with vendors and say, hey, this one has some chops, and you know, they have some good reviews, and we've done our research, and this might be a good option, versus somebody that's like, we don't know who that is, and buyer beware. So,
that's a great point. Now, so I just want to ask one more thing about this, or related to this. Okay, you mentioned earlier HomeSnap, and CoStar, right, has acquired HomeSnap. HomeSnap is a very popular mobile app. And the question I have there is it a different analysis? Do you look at things differently? Like when HomeSnap got bought by CoStar versus when showing time is in a proposed acquisition with Zillow. Is there a different analysis that takes place when something like that happens? And relating to that, is MRED continue to be happy, satisfied with its relationship with HomeSnap?
So it is different because, full disclosure, I am on the board and the executive committee of the Broker Public Portal. And so not to get too deep in the weeds, but the Broker Public Portal is a nonprofit, or I guess I should say an LLC. It's an organization who is owned by MLSs and brokerages throughout the world, really, that championed the fair display guidelines. So if you just go to fairdisplay.org, it talks about what are kind of the tenets behind an industry-friendly portal. And so the fair display guidelines contain things such as, you know, you're listing your lead. We're not going to sell your lead off to somebody just because they want to buy it. We're not going to put the three-headed monster on there. We're going to control advertising and work with brokerages. Like, there's a whole list of things. And so the Broker Public Portal was created to enforce those fair display guidelines. And the portal entered into an agreement with HomeSnap. And so that is the reason that MRED has deployed HomeSnap, is because MRED, like many other brokerages and MLSs, is part owner of the Broker Public Portal. And so when CoStar announced their acquisition of HomeSnap, the board of managers that I'm on with the Broker Public Portal immediately convened a meeting to say, hey, you know, like, what does this look like? Because the role, again, of the portal is to enforce the fair display guidelines. And we just wanted to make sure that this acquisition didn't adversely impact the fair display guidelines. So it's a little bit different process to answer your question from what happened with Showing Time, because I'm certainly not on the board of Showing Time. So that process looked a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, the sentiments are the same. It is all about what is it that's happening in the marketplace and how do MRED's brokerages want us to react to it? You know, what terms do we need to tighten down? What things do we need to push back on? Like, all of those conversations are happening right now. And so I have really appreciated not just associations like NSBAR, but also brokerages that have contacted me to say, hey, you know, what's going on here? How can we give you the feedback so that we can push forward on decisions that we need to make in either of those realms? They're not lightly held decisions that are being discussed and made. So again, it's just more important than ever that we have a tight line of communication. So
yeah, well, and it certainly sounds like you can certainly react if you need to. If you need to do something, you're certainly positioned to do that at this point, right? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, we have a seat at the table, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, if you don't have a seat at the table, it's because you're on the menu, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, exactly. So okay, so now let's there's some other big picture issues. I just love the fact that I've got you for a couple of minutes to talk to you about a couple of these things. We hear a lot of chatter in the industry, especially from the association perspective, about mergers, acquisitions, everybody. And there has been some activity. There have been quite a reduction across the country in the number of realtor associations, number of MLSs. That's all kind of shrinking down, but that's not the flashy stuff. The flashy news is what we've been kind of talking about. Zillow possibly acquiring Showing Time, CoStar acquiring HomeSnap, CoStar attempting to acquire CoreLogic. So, right? And so I guess my question is, and I'm going to call this well-funded companies buying up existing top-notch functionality, right? Do you see that continuing? Do you see that as a trend? And if so, what do you see as the ramifications for our industry?
Yeah, I think that other acquisitions, well, either on the home site or home Showing Time side or the HomeSnap side, both of those, we did not get any advance notice because they were acquired by publicly traded companies that, you know, have SEC governs like a whole lot there. And So while they were somewhat of a surprise when they happened, not really as far as the overall, like, are acquisitions going to happen, like that generality. I think we have to assume that is the case, again, without any insider information about specifics behind the deal. So that is why it's important to really understand like the different values that MLSs and brokerages have to offer, and analyze who the players are and try as much as we can to figure out like which decisions should be made by what groups. So maybe specifically, let's give it a concrete example here. MRED became involved in an entity called the Mls Grid a few years ago. And the Mls Grid is what is responsible for doing data distribution out to all of our brokerage and vendor customers. And so this is a company that MRED, in conjunction with other MLSs, created to handle that. We did look at going the vendor route here. But very much, even back then, was the discussion about, is this a critical component of what an MLS delivers? And the answer is yes. Like, we aggregate data and we disseminate it. And do we want to have a vendor completely in control of that when we know that we can't control what that vendor becomes down the line? So those conversations have been in the industry for a long time, and they continue. We have a very robust roadmap at MRED, and you know, I talked to another MLS just before this podcast today to talk about how can we work together and, you know, who's going to do what. So those conversations are absolutely occurring pretty much on a daily basis nowadays. And again, it's also with our brokerage customers, because I even had some of our brokers talk about, you know, can they own part of MLS Grid, or, you know, like, how can that ownership piece come into play? And so they're fun conversations. That definitely is the fun part of the job. And again, that's why it's critical that we have robust relationships with our associations and vendors, so that we can put all of the options out on the table and say, hey, if we do this, then that means that this is the monetary, right? Because a big reason that these acquisitions are occurring is because of that sweet, sweet money, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
It's
sure.
hard to turn down.
Sure.
But it has strings attached. So, you know,
Okay.
you just have to weigh everything, because the less money you have, the slower you go. But the more money you have, the less control you have, because it's somebody else's purse. So,
Yeah. Okay, so this kind of addresses, because I had another interesting question. Well, I thought it was an interesting question anyway, but and I want to talk about MRED itself regarding, and I know you can't talk about merger discussions or partnership discussions that you're having, but what I can ask you is, how important is that? Is it important for MRED to grow in this fashion? How does that benefit us when MRED does that?
So MRED has had a growth strategic goal for years. And it came from our brokerages, who have told us repeatedly that the MRED marketplace does not track with the brokerage's office footprint. And so it's really difficult for brokerages to work across multiple MLSs with different rules, with different networks of agents on the other end of the transaction. It just makes things more complex, and it doesn't add a lot of value to a brokerage necessarily to have to belong to multiple MLSs. They would rather spend the money and the brokerage resources doing fun stuff rather than trying to herd cats.
Right.
So that's the reason that MRED, as I mentioned, has absolutely a strategic goal to continue to consolidate. But I don't think that consolidation is a one size fits all necessarily. So again, going back to our project with the MLS Grid, we're working with MLSs across the entire country to a common end. We're not consolidating with those MLSs anything other than specific MLS functionality that we can all agree on and we can all pitch in financially and with our staff resources to make things easier for our brokerages that are in all of the different marketplaces. And we've seen a huge success in that environment. And so that's why I would love to see it go beyond data distribution into some of the other things, whether that's a consolidated showing service. I could definitely, I'm not announcing anything, I'm just saying I could see something like that emerging. So I think that it's important to not try a one-size-fits-all approach. However, we can work with other entities in the industry to make things more efficient for our brokerages. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and it's always with, in your case, the customer, in our case, the member in mind, right? I mean, that's what this ends up doing, is all sorts of things that make things better for the customer, right? I mean, in the long term. So
exactly.
All right, so we've talked about some big picture things already. Is there a big picture issue out there that you want to talk about, that you want to tell our audience about specifically?
Well, and we've brought it up several times. I mean, it's like the feedback loop. We do an NPS survey at least twice a year to all of MRED subscribers, saying, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are we doing, sort of question, and then what can we do better? I just want everyone to know that MRED staff looks at every single response, and that's how we figure out how to prioritize all of the requests that come in, because I can't promise that we're going to do everything and be perfect for everyone. That's why we have to pick and choose our priorities, and the NPS tool definitely helps us do that. We do have our roadmap published on our website. So if you go to mredllc.com and it's under About MRED, there's a little drop-down menu that says our roadmap. It talks about things that have already been put into our strategic plan based upon our feedback. And so they have things that we're talking about, like digital earnest money system. So think about either like Venmo or PayPal or some sort of app like that that helps you transfer money. So we're doing something in that space so that agents no longer have to go pick up a paper check and then cart that to the, you know, whatever, there's a title company or bank or brokerage or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, use digital. That's a big thing that it follows our philosophy of just trying to make everybody more efficient. So I don't want to belabor it, but please go on to the roadmap, look at that. We keep it updated as there are new developments. And anyway, just be involved in the process.
Yeah, and I know that there's a way for brokerages, for managing brokers, to really kind of go a little bit more in depth on this stuff, right? Because I know you got a meeting coming up. You have a preferred unit owners meeting coming up in April, right? Where people who preferred unit owners are invited, and they're going to be given this information probably in a little bit more detail, obviously more in depth than whatever else is coming out, right?
Well, so the meeting coming up in April, I believe it's April 8th, if I remember correctly, we really struggled because usually in a non-pandemic year, we try to have an in-person event where we not only tell everybody that, you know, these products are coming out and kind of use it as a chance to debut our new coolness, right? So then we typically, after that, went into a strategic planning meeting to where we really had great discussions about what's next. Obviously, it's different in a virtual environment. And so we have selected to bifurcate those two goals of the meeting. And so the April meeting is more about what's happening, like debuting the new stuff that, like the earnest money thing I just talked about, and a few others that we reserve for our preferred unit owners to have a chance to see it first and schedule training first. And then we're hoping that the strategic planning portion, I mean, fingers crossed that we can have an in-person meeting maybe later this year. If not, then we will figure out how to get that feedback and do it in an online environment rather than in person. But we figured, you know, how to eat an elephant, right? Like bites at a time. Let's do what we can. right now and at least get that into the marketplace and get that feedback going on what we're doing. And then, you know, we always want to know what our brokerages and our associations want us to do in our strategic planning. So it's not that we're not going to do that. We're just not going to do that on a Zoom meeting that lasts for a day and a half.
Right.
So, you're welcome.
All right. There you,
Right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And for NSBAR brokerages out there, managing brokers that are interested in getting a preferred unit ownership that haven't yet, they can just email jeff@nsbar.org. I know a couple of people over at MRED. I might be able to get you one. So we'll take care of that. All right, let me ask you a fun question. What's the future of the MLS? Will it still be around in 5 years? What will it look like?
Yes, it will definitely be around in 5 years. And I've been in the industry since the 90s where, you know, it was like the death of the MLS was every conference. So kind of over that already. You know, and I think that is a good pulse, right? If we're going to see how alive we are, we do have a lot of people reaching out to us to help with solutions. So I think that that is a good sign that we're still relevant. And,
Yes.
but that's only as long as we're providing value with the changing times. So I'm very optimistic that these acquisitions will further solidify the relationship between MLSs and brokerages, because I think that we know how to work well together. And so this is just another way that we can test the relationship and provide value and continue with a robust real estate environment. I mean, gosh, the market across the United States, but especially in Illinois as well, is thriving. So, you know what, that's good for all of us. We'll get through whether it's the pandemic or acquisitions. I have no doubt about that. And that really is the fun part of the job.
It is. And so there's my next question, but it sounds like you've answered it. It sounds like you're optimistic about the real estate marketplace in 2021, right? Everybody's saying it's going to be bonkers again, right?
Well, consumer behavior is changing. You know, so people want different things from housing than they did a couple years ago, right? Like the bonus room and the home office, and you know, just the commuting is different. And like when things change, consumers respond to it, and realtors are there to help the consumers respond. And so I don't pretend to have a crystal ball to say when things are going to settle down, but it doesn't feel like they're starting to settle down at all. I'm not hearing that from pretty much any marketplace. And I talk to a lot of people across the country, and it seems to be very much a time of flux for consumers across the country. So, you know, I am worried about what the economy might do, right? But I think back to, again, I started in the industry in the 90s, and, you know, after 9/11 hit, you know, the economy definitely suffered, but the real estate industry was equally in a time of flux back then. So, I mean, it wasn't always for happy reasons that people have to move, honestly, but the moving component is just as important as it ever has been. And that's why people need that helping hand to make that transition. And while efficiencies in like virtual earnest money or transaction management or things that are online, it certainly helps, no question. That's not the entire transaction, I don't think, at least not at this point. I mean, I listen to agents out there that, you know, what's like, what hat are they wearing today? And sometimes it's about really trying to figure out what that buyer wants, and listening to them say one thing, but their actions are like, yeah, that you said that you wanted a 3-bedroom, but sounds really like you want a 4-bedroom, right? Like to try to play that role, which I don't think a computer at this point is even going to touch that sort of a conversation. So
right. Well, because the efficiencies, there are all sorts of things in real estate transactions where efficiencies are great, but I don't know that you want efficiencies in wisdom and judgment, right? Those aren't where you want that. So
yeah.
I think that's where the real estate professional comes into play. So And I recall you mentioning we had an association executives meeting recently. I guess there's some changes coming up with the private listing network, right? That people should just look for communications from MRED, from your local association, NSBAR, and or from those that are in other associations to make sure you stay abreast of that stuff. So.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you. For the private listing network, we listened to a lot of our agents say that they wanted their consumer experience to be better with the private listing network, and that in some cases they were using other tools and whatnot to try to compensate for MRED not providing a better consumer interface. And so we take that to heart. And so we have definitely focused some development efforts on the consumer piece of the private listing network. So coming soon to an MLS near you.
There you go. Right, exactly. So now I've got one last question. Well, it's actually a two-part question. How many associations are part of MRED now?
15.
Okay, so and out of those 15, which one is your favorite?
Well.
Nobody,
Yeah,
but people from NSBAR are listening to this, so
no,
you can be
of course,
honest.
of course. I'll let you insert that. You're so funny, Jeff.
I try anyway.
You do
Is
good.
there anything else that you wanted to talk about before you take off? Anything else?
Just to say thank you. You know, you are an incredibly supportive association, and we appreciate the ability to, you know, reach out to your members, and anything that we can do, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We really are here to serve, and as only possible if we understand what it is that people want. So don't be shy.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us again, right? But certainly today, every time I speak to you, I come out of the conversation smarter than I was. So I really do. All the best to you and the family, please.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Please keep an eye on NSBAR Communications to stay current on NSBAR happenings and to know when one of our great podcasts is coming up. Thank you, Bradley Laberman, for the great job running the board. And thanks to you for tuning in to Raising the NSBAR. I very much appreciate it. Please stay safe, and let's hold out a little while longer to beat this pandemic. Talk to you soon.